Hi guys, welcome to the final look in my Ankara series. Based on a request I got a couple of weeks back, I decided to go for this jumpsuit, but make it short. It has bishop sleeves, like a cuff in another color, and it has an open back. I probably think this is my favorite look of the entire series because I think it can be easily dressed up or down. You could just throw on a pair of heels and, a necklace and look all put together, or you could throw all that away and wear, a pair of slides and just stroll to your friend's house. Now that the series is over, if you guys have video ideas, content ideas that you want me to create, let me know in the comments and I just might make them if it's within my power to. Also, make sure that you subscribe to my channel for future content and give this video a thumbs up if you like it. And, just in general, engage with this video so that it gets seen by more people. Before we get started, I made use of 3 yards of Ankara for this jumpsuit, and I hope I continue to remember to give yardage detail in subsequent videos. So let's get started. This is my basic back pants pattern. I'm going to merge it with the basic bodice pattern to make the jumpsuit, but with a few tweaks. First, I measured 3 centimeters up from the side seam, then I drew a straight line up from center back. I placed my basic bodice pattern guided by these 2 lines and I traced it out. Regardless of how your basic blocks look, the goal is to increase the length of the upper part of the pants so that it allows for comfortable movement at the crotch and to blend the 2 patterns to the same size. This is why I raised the pants pattern by 3 centimeters before adding the bodice, and why I will now proceed to eliminate the dart in the back bodice. And to do that, I measured the width of the dart and it came to about 4.2 centimeters. And I measured 4.2 centimeters at the side seam at waist, and I drew a line right back to the bust. Next, I removed the shoulder dart just because I wanted to. You can keep it if you want. What I would do next is to increase the hip by 1 centimeter just so that I can easily blend this to the new waistline of the pants. For the back opening, I measured 3 centimeters from the center back at waist and connected the line from here to the neck. From the new waistline, I measured the length of my pants, about 18.25 inches. Drew a line to mark that, and then I widened the legs by squaring down from the hip and the side seam. Next up, I measured 3 centimeters out of the bodice waist, and this will form my waistband. I drew a line there and this back pattern is done. As for my front pattern, the principle remains the same. Raise the pant side seam by 3 centimeters, draw a line up from the center front, then go on to blend with the bodice pattern. I started by moving the pant dart to a corresponding position to the bodice dart. I did this by finding the middle of the bodice waist dart, drawing a line that runs from the bust point through the middle all the way to the pant. Then I drew a line from the base of the pant dart to cross the first line. I also measured the width of the dart, divided it by 2, came to about 1.2 centimeters, so I measured 1.2 centimeters on each side of the dart middle at waist. This reduced my waist dart so that I now have excess which I can take out at the bodice dart so that it can match the pants. I was measuring the waist from the new side seam to the first new dart leg. Jumped the dart since the dart would be closed when I sew, and then I moved to the second dart leg and measured from there to the center front. This length came to 6.5 inches, and it confirmed to me that my bodice size is still correct even though I have, changed things here and there, and also this was actually a little more than I needed. I erased the old darts and drew on the new ones, measured the length of my pants from the new waistline, and then I widened the legs by squaring down from crotch and side seam. I measured 3 centimeters out of the bodice for my waistband. just as I did with the back, and the pattern was ready at this point, so I cut. To make my band, I drew a line that is the same length as my waist circumference, that is 24 inches. Remember, I cut out 3 centimeters from my bodice patterns, so I measured 3 centimeters up from here, drew a line connecting the points, closed up the band at the side seams, and I added a 1 centimeter seam allowance all around, and this is the outcome. The bishop sleeve simply has more fullness at the bottom than it does at the top. Knowing this, I drew a line in the middle of the paper, and then I guided and transferred my basic sleeve pattern such that the midpoint is right on this line I just drew, so that I have equal vacant space at each side of the paper. I increased the length of the pattern by 5 inches, although much later when I was sewing I reduced to 2 inches because it wasn't draping nicely. So I drew a straight line on there across the entire breadth of the paper, and I joined this line back to the side seam of the sleeve, and that's all. The base came to 24 inches and F means front and B back. As for my cuff, it is 10 centimeters by 20 centimeters in dimension, and in deciding the width I added 3 centimeters to the measurement of my wrist so that it has enough room for an overlap. I completed the other sides. Left, I added seam allowance, and it looked like this when it was done. So these are all my patterns, and I also picked up this inseam pocket pattern that I made from a video I recently made on wide leg pants, so you can check it out to see just how I drafted. It is very simple, I promise. I added a 1 centimeter seam allowance to all of the pieces except for the pant pieces, where I added 1.5 inch seam allowance at the hem just to finish it there. So these are all the fabrics laid out. As for the bodice, I have 2 pieces of the front pattern cut on fold, and I have 4 pieces of the back bodice. Also, I have 4 pieces of the pocket pattern, 2 pieces of the cuffs in black fabric, 2 pieces of the waistband also in black fabric, 2 pieces of the sleeve pattern where I had added seam allowance, 2 pieces of the pant patterns, each of them. So we're going to start by making the darts on the bodice. In making my dart, because this dart were joined together at the bust point, what I did was to sew the larger dart from the shoulder first, and I would stop just a couple of centimeters to the end of it, then switch to the waist dart, which I would sew and then carefully taper into the shoulder dart that I just made. So there is really not like, a tip point, just make them run into themselves. Alright, so now that my darts are done, I moved on to putting the back pieces on top of the front pieces and just stitching at the shoulders and at the side seams. Once these are done, I moved on to my sleeve pattern, which I made sure that I created a snip in the head of the sleeve so that I could remember where that is and also mark the part that belongs to the front. So stitch on the sides of the sleeves first. So I left a 3-inch space unstitched at the bottom of the sleeve. Yeah, so now this forms an opening that I will just top stitch in this manner just to finish it up. So top stitch, turn, stitch, and then turn again and stitch all the way down to the end of the sleeve. At this point, I moved my stitch length to the highest number on my sewing machine, which is 4, and I sewed at the base of my sleeve from one end to the other, and I used the long stitch length so that I could create gathers, and that's what I'm doing right now. So I went ahead to pick up one thread and just pull all the way until the gathers had fully formed in the entire sleeve material. So I picked up my cuff pieces, which I had fused interfacing to at this point. So I would fold them in this way and stitch at the sides, leaving a 1 centimeter seam allowance at the end open. After stitching, I cut off the excess to reduce bulk, and I turned the cuff inside out. Now to one part of the cuff, I pinned the gathered sleeve from one end to the other, and then I stitched. You just want to make sure that the gathers are even and that you're paying attention to the middle of the cuff and the middle of the sleeve and ensuring that those match. Once I was done, I folded the second part of the cuff inwards. I pinned it in place, and then I flipped the sleeve, well, now the sleeve, but really just the cuff, over to the right side, where I stitched in the ditch on the right side of the cuff to keep everything completely secured. What I did next was to use my button sewing foot to stitch on press-on buttons to the cuff, and my sleeves are done at this point. Time to stitch them to the bodice. I inserted the sleeve into the armhole, and I stitched. Looks like this. Now recall that I have 2 bodice pieces. The second piece is my lining, so I put the lining to the main top, right sides facing, and I pinned them together, and I would stitch from one end of the back bodice neck right here through the front bodice neck all the way to the second end of the back bodice neck. I stitched that, and right after it's looking like this, I turned the seam allowance towards the lining bodice, and I ran a straight stitch all the way through the neck from back to front to back. Next, I reached between the 2 bodices, and I would put the armhole seam allowances together, and I would stitch round. This is difficult but possible, and I actually did that to finish both raw edges by hiding them. By the time I'm done hiding them, it looks like this. Moving on to my pants. Moving on to my front pant, I already stitched the darts. I put the 2 pieces together, right sides facing, and I stitched the center front. I'll leave a little room for stitching the crotch much later. As for the back, I would just stitch from where my zipper will begin to just before the crotch. Now I have to account for 3 centimeters of the zipper that would be inserted into the band part. After that, I measured 5 centimeters down from the seam on each side, and I placed my inseam pockets here and stitched them to the pant. I did this on both front and back pieces, and after stitching, I would turn the seam allowance towards the pocket. Then I would run a straight under stitching on the immediate edge of the inseam pocket all the way down. So with that done on each side of the front and back pant pieces, let's put them together and stitch in this manner, top to the pocket and down. And in stitching, you would have to raise your machine foot and pivot a few times, as you can see me doing in this video. Now, once both sides were done, the pockets were real and wearable, and after that I stitched the legs together, after which I would finish the crotch, and the pants looked like this. Next up are the band pieces. I already fused them with interfacing, so one of them goes right on the pants like this. After this, I installed the zipper. To the second waistband, I sewed on a ready-made bias to its one side and back to the pants. I put the bodice to the pants, arranged, pinned it and everything. And then recall the other band piece that I just sewed bias binding to. I pinned it right on top of the bodice so that the bodice is sandwiched between the two bands. Now I would sew from the beginning at the back to the end at the other side, also at the back. And now it looks like this. I turned the seam allowance towards this second band and I understitched as I have done a few times in this video. I cut off the bulk and it was a lot, and I flipped the second band over the first and stitched at the sides. Next up, I turned to the right side of the pants and I stitched in the ditch to secure the band in place and just keep everything all intact. We're nearly done. It's looking like this. I merely measured the 1.5 inches of hemming allowance that I had added while cutting out the fabric. I drew the lines to create markers and I would fold it in this way and then fold half an inch even further in and I would stitch. Thank you so much for coming to my tutorial. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for future content, and I will see you in the next one. Click on the screen to watch the entire Ankara series. Bye!